Welcome to another episode of Hiring and Empowering Solutions. I am your host here, Molly McGrath, and I am so excited about our guest today. Real quick, if you are a longtime listener, welcome back. We're glad to have you. If you are a new listener, you can check us out at hiringandempowering.com. You can click on the podcast tab, and there'll be a way to subscribe right there. So please subscribe to our podcast so you get our new episode that we drop every Tuesday. All right. So today I'm so excited about our guest that we have today. Hi, Jason.
Hello. How are you doing?
Oh, I am great. I'm so excited about this conversation as we were talking about, as we were chatting before we went live here today. Today, we are really talking about the key to managing remote teams. And you want to check out Jason's website, Jason Treu. I'll put it here in the show notes. And also he's going to have a wonderful gift for us at the end of the show called Cards Against Mundanity. And we're going to talk about how to get coworkers to like each other. So that'll be a really fun exercise for you to download at the end of this episode. But let's dive in. Let's talk about the key to managing remote teams. This conversation is, wow. I mean, there's never been a greater need than this time, especially since the recent global pandemic, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is that when this happened, people were unprepared, right? And then they were forced into a remote setting. And even the people in general that had been managing teams remotely without people there, I don't think we're doing a great job to begin with. So I think the problem has been exacerbated. I think that you've seen companies do a better job in terms of communicating, trying to be more transparent for part of this pandemic right now. And so you saw initially that employees and even other managers and some leaders were responding pretty positively in terms of like how they viewed the experience in the workplace, and the engagement numbers went up. But now you're seeing the numbers are what they were pre-COVID, and they're dipping back down again across all the research data I'm seeing, which is just what I would suppose at some point, because the challenge you have now when you're managing all these people is before COVID's top of your mind, but as time goes along, people get used to living in it, and they're not worried every day that they're going to die. They're still concerned about it, right? And it's top of the list. But now when they're at home, they're concerned about their kids, their dogs, all the other things that they have to do around. And it's much more difficult to get people's attention and time span. And then I think also the other couple things are weighing on people is if you look at managers today, all my clients and other people I spoke to are working on average about 5 to 15 hours more a week. Mm-hmm. And the employees, because they're more disconnected just from work and society itself, want more time with their manager. Well, the manager doesn't have more time. And even if you saw the data pre-COVID, the challenge is that most companies expected their managers to be managing and coaching and developing their employees 30% of the time, and the data is more like 10. So the gap was already there, and the challenge was there to keep everyone together. But now it's just been exacerbated because out of sight, out of mind, right? Mm-hmm. And so the question starts to be, like, what do you do as a manager leading teams, right? No matter what size of those teams or where the employees are, a lot of the things are still the same across the board, but it's going to require people to have significantly new skill sets, viewing things differently than they had before to be successful. And it's on the onus of leaders and managers to be able to learn these things and really implement them and do things significantly different than they had been before in terms of leadership and managing others.
Mm-hmm. And so for some people, it's actually a good thing because they took it for granted. You know, they'd have the water cooler conversation or scream across the office. Most of the firms that we work with are small, solo, medium-sized firms. And we're seeing this now more than ever. Just this morning, I had one of my consulting calls, and the professional law firm administrator, for lack of a better term, the manager, the COO, the CEO of the firm, you know, she is on her second like mental health day that she just had to take a break because she's just getting hammered so often. And it was fascinating because I said, all right, wait, time out, guys. Like, you have to build within your daily, within your weekly infrastructure time to do team huddles, to really breathe some energy into your entire team that's out virtually, and giving them those booster shots that they need to keep them inspired, empowered, and having their, key performance indicators that they're shooting for each week, right?
Yeah, and I think and I think all of those things are pretty critical. And I think part of the problem is that when you start from the beginning, if you don't give people the rules and tools to begin with, then they're really challenged, right? People have to know what's expected of them and how they need to conform to what behavior do they need to uphold to, right? What are the values and things that they need to actually do, right? Because some managers want people to show up 5 minutes before the call to make sure that they're there. Some people on time on a Zoom call. Well, no one really knows, right? Like, what tools are we using and how do we need to use those, right? And when are we expected to be present? How, like, all these things about communication, how should we collaborate? When should we use the phone? When should we use video? I mean, there's a lot of things on a team that need to be explicit to everyone so they're absolutely clear on what's expected from them, and the technology pieces to put it all together. And you just can't have it on the fly. It needs to actually be something that's sent out. And you could do this as a manager, or a company could do this overall. It really just depends, right? I mean, don't wait on other people to do this. If your organization isn't doing it, you need to also do that part of it to make sure that people understand how to get their work done, and work hours and all these other things that are required of them, right? And then we also have the next thing is just what are the culture, right, that you want to have on the team? Like, what are the norms that go along? What are the styles of the people on here? What are their behaviors? And how do we understand how to interact with these different people in a remote world? And then how do we also make sure that they're acting as a team and collaborating as a whole, right? And then you as a manager, like, that piece of it is, how do you do one-on-ones? How are you structuring it? What questions are you asking? Do you have, one-on-one solely for their career development? Do you have time where you're giving them feedback, right, on a continual basis? And what's that feedback look like, right? And I mean, I think all of these things need to be spelled out and structured. And how are you giving employees a voice, right, on your team? Like, when are you asking them questions, right? How are you getting them to collaborate as a team? Is that working well? Is that not working well? What team building or teamwork exercises or connectivity or belonging exercises are you doing, or strategies to keep all of these, the team together? And a huge piece of this now is the skill sets that leaders and managers are required are rapidly growing, right? What they need to do is significantly increasing, and it has been over the last couple of years. So the question is, the leader and manager, right, what are you doing to evolve your skill sets and get them significantly better? And do you know what skill sets to focus on? And are you getting training, coaching, or help on the ones that you need? And I think in order to manage a team correctly and manage it remotely, like, all of these things have to be done correctly. And if your organization isn't doing it for you or having that available, you need to figure out how to put these pieces together, or your team's not going to work very well and they're going to underperform.
Mm-hmm. You said something earlier that I think is so spot on, is that we're 8 months into this virtual environment, probably not going to go away for some time. A lot of people that I'm hearing that, this is working out pretty well and we are going to be virtual indefinitely, or some of them saying permanently, especially for certain roles, 80% of their workforce. So now you see in people that the numbers are coming in, the data is rolling in, and you're seeing that people are starting to kind of pause, they're managing children, pets. Now we got the holidays coming up. I think this is a perfect time right now for this year-end sprint to almost do a stop, restart with your team and really begin to redefine and put it in concrete in regards to many of the things that you talked about: collaboration, team building, working on strategic products versus just focusing on what do we have to do to survive today, and just focusing on the production, but also how do we communicate internally, doing weekly team huddles, things of that nature. This is a perfect time before holidays come in. What are the rules around that? And really doing a stop restart and treating it like standards within a business. So can you talk to us about some keys that you have in regards to really creating a team that can work together in a virtual, remote perspective, not only for the employees, but for the managers?
Yeah, I think part of this is, like I said before, I think if you set up the rules, people know what to do. And I think that causes a lot of concern about what is expected and what am I supposed to do, and to stop the guesswork on that. So I think that piece of it is absolutely critical in the beginning. I think the second piece is understanding, do I have the technology that's needed here, right, for collaboration? And like, is it actually working? Because if you don't have that, then you can't be productive and efficient, right? Which is going to cause people a lot of extra work, which isn't good. So I think that's kind of the baseline plumbing that people need to do. I think the other huge issue that comes out of this, I hear over and over again, is how do I know people are actually working on the things that they're supposed to be working on? So it's a lack of trust, right, going across the board. And you see this from all the surveys, right? I mean, like only less than 40% of employees trust their managers and leaders, right, that they're giving all the information today, that they are, focused on the right things, that they're leading the business strategically, right? And if you look at the other data on this, like that 80%, around 80% of managers and leaders are not prepared for the future. Like they don't have the skill sets for 2021. And that's from multiple sources, right? So a lot of these things sort of go back to that piece of it. And then the other part of it is that, look, teamwork is not something they're born with. It has to be a strategic priority. So what are you doing to foster that with people and build trust, right? And that's, I think, where the rubber meets the road. And so one of the things a couple of years ago that I started to focus on was, how do you really do that with people? Like, what's really the core way of getting at people working better together? And I realized that, after looking at some research and just thinking about the best teams I've ever worked on and asking thousands of people, like, describe to me the best environment you've ever been in, either personally or professionally, and what does that look like? It was people that they highly trusted. And when I looked at the research, and in May 2019, Harvard Business Review has a great research done by Marcus Buckingham that shows when you have a high trust with your manager or leader on the team, your employee engagement goes up 8 times, which is a proxy for performance. And if you just trust people on your team, right, which seems good rather than high trust, if you just trust people, it's actually at a 0, right, for your engagement. Like you're at a very low level at that point. And so I think the challenge is that you have to build this as like a manager and leader. And it's the same part as the rules and the technology. If you don't have trust, the rest of it's going to fall apart. And so people have to figure out, how do I do that with everyone on my team? Because if I don't, I'm not going to perform well. They're not going to perform well. And they're probably currently underperforming anyway. So I realized that after looking at research, and I found this study by a Professor Arthur Aaron back in 1997, he was trying to build interpersonal closeness between people, right? Just get them to meet each other as strangers and build a high level of trust so they felt very close to another person. And the basis of the research was just asking vulnerable questions. And so that was only one-on-one. And one of the things that happened is he just had complete strangers who didn't know each other, asked them 36 questions over 45 minutes. And what happened is 30% of the people said they created the closest relationship in their lives in 45 minutes.
Wow.
So you can imagine that's a really high level of trust. So that's how I created, the game Cards Against Mundanity was just a tool to get people to share vulnerable experiences in a group. So they got to know each other and they felt like they could share information and they felt like they could, you know, admit they're wrong, right? Actually care about each other, because if we treat people like the closest people in our personal lives, we collaborate better with them, we compromise, we communicate better, we're willing to let things go, we're willing to try things out, we have people's backs, all the things that you saw on the highest performing teams right now. Well, that's just a proxy for that. So the end of the day is, if you don't know the people that you work with extremely well and understand where they come from, we make up stories about people and we distance ourselves from them. So that's what happens on an average team, right? If you have a team of 5 people, 3 people get along and 2 people don't, because they don't, not everyone sees each other in each other, and they make up stories of why that they aren't together or why the person is different than them. And that destroys the trust in the team. So the only way to do that is to get people to share things in a group so they can learn about each other and start to realize that, oh, that person's a lot like me, right? They've had either similar experiences or had similar emotions and experiences. And therefore that helps them build trust and opens a door, right? So I tell people that that's one of the key things, is just to ask questions, right? And if you have a game, it's a lot easier than you coming up with questions. And if they're not vulnerable, then they really don't matter, because you have to get to know someone's DNA and their experiences in their lives that matter to them and what they care about, right? So I would say that's one of it. The other thing happens is people's working styles, right? I think people overlook that because we see the world from the blueprint that we're in. So there's things called how to work with me manuals, which is essentially a list of questions for asking someone to get to know them, right? And like their working styles, like what are their pet peeves? Like, how do they like to communicate best? Like, if you have a problem or have to give them hard feedback, how should you approach that person, right? If they're having a bad day, like what's one thing you can do to help them get in a better mood, right? Well, there's, you can customize a list, but there's an endless list of questions, but they're strategic. And the problem is that if you don't, we guess how to deliver information and how to talk to other people based on how we see the world, and we're wrong almost all the time. And that causes a lot of problems for other people rather than getting like a game plan. And I would say to you, the third piece of this that can do it is just peer-to-peer feedback, right? Peer-to-peer recognition. I mean, people like to hear what things they're doing well and do it in a public way that someone knows that they appreciate it. So there's a lot of things you can do for that in a team setting, which are super quick and super fast, that make a massive difference on the productivity, right? I mean, and doing those a few times a month can increase the productivity in a team from anywhere from like 15 to 30%. And I mean, that's pretty significant when you're looking at like what you're doing as an overall team. So I think that those are steps that need to be taken. And then I'd say the fourth one is, you, as a manager and leader, you need to ask your team for feedback. Like, you need to ask them questions. I'm like, so the question you said before was just like, okay, well, what's worked well this year? What's the most important lesson you've learned for the year? Like, how can we better communicate and collaborate as a team? Gives one suggestion, right? And if you have everyone in the team go around and share all that, you have a lot of data, and you can hear what people have to say. And you structure that by the person who's the least senior on the team goes first to the person who is the most senior. So that way you don't get bias in it, and you get a lot of feedback that way. But you can enroll people in the challenges and solutions, right? You can even ask them the question, what would you like to see different in 2021 than 2020 if you only could pick one thing that's regarding this team, right? And feedback and listening is a key thing. And then how do you communicate that, implement it, right, as well, and get back, and then measure it to some degree. Sometimes measuring is hard, but even if you can't, if you communicate it back, you can do a lot of things as a manager and as an employee and as a teammate, right? And I know a lot of these people listening, well, I don't have any time. And I'm like, well, that may be true, but your inefficiencies and lack of productivity is going to hurt you, because you're not going to get promoted. You're not going to make money, right? So this is what I'm talking about, is for your self-interest and the people around you. right? Because if the people around you don't perform at a really high level, you will not do well, even if you do perform at that level, because you're going to be lumped in with them, because no one's going to figure out exactly what you did if you're in a sea of people who are on the bottom 25% in your organization, or the people that run it perceive people as not doing well, or they don't trust you.
Mm-hmm. Such a unique way of kind of flipping the switch, if you will, in regards to so often in a virtual setting, in quote unquote managing team, leaders will come from a place that keep KPIs, production, what have you. And what you're saying is almost like, I think it's crucial conversations. It start with heart. So what I'm hearing you say is you need to start with the humanness of things and starting with building that trust, creating that vulnerability, giving people a safe place to communicate and share in regards to number one. And then also number two is understanding people's working styles. And really, because again, the way I like to give and receive information is probably vastly different than the way that you like to give and receive information and direction, how I digest things. And so often I serve as a fractional CEO for law firms for 25 years. And when I manage a lot of the business, that's exactly what I say. I run a lot of assessments like Colby and Strength Finder and things of that nature. And words of appreciation in the workplace, and figuring out how people want to receive information and how they give information, which is, I love your perspective. It's so very different. And then also getting that feedback and creating a safe place for it. What's not working? What would you like to see differently? And maybe what's your proposed solution? So giving them that permission and responsibility and authority that not only, do we want to hear from you, but also we're interested in maybe your strategy or your approach or how you would solve it and shift it, right?
Yeah, because I think part of this is having more empathy, right? So you're seeing, like, one of the phrases is the CEO is no longer the chief executive officer, they're the chief empathy officer. And I think that really is true, because your lack of empathy is hurting, right? Your lack of perspective is not going to be one that is going to work well unless you understand where everyone else is coming from and why they're thinking what they're thinking across the board. And this is these are the basic building blocks for every successful relationship you have. And what people do is they skip these, assuming that people will just figure it out. But people are driven by things, right? So you'll see, diversity and inclusion initiatives haven't worked for a really long time. And then people started to figure out, well, if I actually attach belonging to that, I can actually get a more diverse and inclusive environment, because end of the day, belonging is what people want. And without it, they're not going to look at diversity and inclusion, because how does it apply to me? What's the upside, right? And there's all these other challenges I have going on. How would I really prioritize this? Mm-hmm. So it is these base level things and things that people skip over to try to get to the rest that don't work. And what ends up happening in most organizations is you have a lot of smart people. They've scaled a successful business and it stalls, right? It's not growing near as much. And what happens is their skills and ability have hit a ceiling. And they aren't enrolling in what we're talking about, the organization itself. They're not taking the time to do that. And they're not looking at their skill sets, their self-awareness, and how they need to get better. And so it's cascading through the organization. And you see this especially in small and medium-sized businesses all the time, that the reason they're not growing is themselves, but they're unaware of that. And they think it's all these other issues, but it's really them standing in the way. It's not the market. It's not the customers. It's them. And it's
the employees.
Or the employees. It's a lack of understanding that you have to manage a business like this. And you didn't learn this in business school. And probably a lot of the other colleagues are not doing this. And I'm a lawyer. I went to law school, and all the time you see law firms, and I'm like, well, the huge problem is they don't understand this, right? No. They're acting in a corporate framework because other people have done that, but that's still not successful. So end of the day, they're underperforming what they actually could. There's just not as many examples of the other people that are, but they're out there and they're doing extremely well. And they will rise to the top, and they're much more competitive at a fraction of the size and can do really well because they are figuring some of these things out. And the question is, why isn't your organization, and why aren't you focused on the people part of the business? Because that is where the biggest lift is. Because if you look at a law firm, who is there to run the business? People. Who is there to win the cases? People. Who is there that can be the best law firm out there for what you're doing? It's the people, right? So unless you figure out how to tap in to that and maximize their performance, competitiveness, right, collaboration, teamwork, engagement, all the rest of it, you can't do as well as you could. And that is the large question. But very few organizations, right, for instance, will put teamwork as a top 5 business priority for 2021. But that's the whole requirement for them doing business, right? Like, so learning new skills, right? I mean, how many law firms out there, or how many other ones like would have that as a top 5 initiative priority and make sure people did it and held them accountable? I think very few, really, end of the day. And I think that's the challenge. A lot of the things we're talking about, not enough people are focused on, and they get stuck, and then they look at the leaf on the tree instead of the root cause. And then they don't ever really solve it. They may make incremental things, but they don't make exponential gains because of what's required is much actually easier to do. But they don't want to do it because it's foreign, it's hard, they have to be vulnerable, they've got to take risks.
They can't bill for it, so it's not production time.
Yeah.
So that's, I love what you're saying, because when you say that people want to belong, right? And they want to be involved in something that they feel like a difference maker. But I would even add to that too. People want to belong, but they're also human beings. I love what you said, teamwork. As you're saying that, I'm like, it's really about human work at this stage of the game, and really looking at them as humans versus first and foremost. And if you don't have that foundational set, because they want to belong, but they also want time and attention. And that's what I hear so often. A big portion of our business is staffing. We do recruiting, and I cannot tell you how many people that will either leave a law firm or a job, or when we're one that is really great, making great money, have great systems and process, but they just don't feel like they're connected to the heartbeat of the business. They don't feel like they have a safe place. They feel like their time, their energy, and their input doesn't matter. And the days of keep your mouth shut and show up and do a job, do what I tell you to do and collect your paycheck are over, especially in this virtual world. If you're living in Podunk, Pennsylvania, and you think that, well, this is what I get to pay people, this is what my marketplace bears. No, because in this day and age, they could go get a virtual job anywhere. I had a candidate that right now that we just placed, and I'm like, why are you taking this job? She goes, because they work 4 days a week. The firm values that they have a work-life balance, and they want us to take Fridays off. And so we're going to crush it Monday through Thursday. And I'm taking a pay cut, and I'm going to work for this firm because they believe in that. And it's just so amazing how many business owners are all about the bottom line, all about the number, and they're glossing over, especially in the legal space. I've never seen so much turnover in the 25 years that I've been doing this. And it's the firms that have a lot of turnover are the ones that see them as employees versus humans. They don't see them as an extension of their business. And really, like you said, you got to look at the root cause.
Yeah. And I think the challenge there goes is like, even the people that are in the business itself, right, that are partners or on any track, like, if they don't feel like they belong or they matter, you just have a bunch of hired guns, right? People that are out there to bill hours and make money, and they really don't care, right? I mean, they're just there to do their job and then leave, even though that job might be 80, 90 hours a week. They really don't care. So the problem is that the business itself and the industry hasn't evolved in a really long time with what's required today to be successful. And they don't, because it's hard to break out, and a lot of these things are required to take risks. It's not safe, and you have to try new things, and some things are going to work and some things aren't, because the people part of a business is an early stage of evolution, because the investment has really never been made on a wide scale for a really long period of time. So people are grappling with it, and COVID has made all these things, exacerbated them and made them much more challenging. But now the wake-up call is here, and you can see the future of what's going on and what's required, and it's
Yeah.
significantly more, and leaders or managers are going to be buried if they don't, right? If you're sitting
Yes.
there thinking, oh, I don't need to go and get coaching, I don't need to go get skills training, I
Yeah.
don't need to get my soft skills up better, you're going to wake up in a couple of years, and you're going to be a 50-year-old successful manager, and some 30-year-old kid or 25-year-old kid's taking their job because they actually have the skill sets you need.
Yeah.
And the organization is going to say, look, we don't need someone who's super smart alone. We need someone who actually can take those 10 people and get the most out of them, not the person who has a track record but can't work in a team or manage or lead people very well. And I'm seeing that already, right?
Oh gosh. I think I think if you don't adopt this right now and make this as part of your year end like framework that you are going to put into your business, I think you're going to see employees leaving in mass exodus within 2021. I can tell you from a recruiting perspective, we poach people from all different websites, anything, because market's so tight. And you would think when we hear all this stuff about employment, unemployment and all that, it's really in the service industry by and large. But in this, it's still a tight employees market. And when I interview people, it's not about the money. They'll work 90 hours a week. And in fact, I see people working harder at home than they did in the office when they have this framework and these keys that you're talking about, where you are setting up this place of vulnerability, where you are setting up a place of trust, where you do have consistent reviews. I lobby for quarterly reviews where you're meeting with your employees individually and you're doing quarterly retreats where you're always anchoring and everybody's clear on the North Star and what their highest value is. And they're always on a growth map and having that, because in this day and age, coaching, it was no longer like an Oprah term, like, oh, that's really cute. No, it's not a Tony Robbins moment anymore. It's a necessity in your business.
Yeah, it is overall. And I think and when you talk about, like, I looked at data last year and they found that, like, if you're an employee who's extremely happy in that work environment, it would take upwards of, and this is just an average, right? It would take an average of 15 to 20% more money to get that person to leave. But if you weren't, it could be as low as 5%. So the problem is that, right, if you don't do what we're talking about, it becomes a money game.
Yeah.
Because people are like, well, I might as well make another 10, 20, 30, whatever money, like working somewhere else, because why would I stay here? It doesn't really matter. I don't care. Like, at least I have more money. But the person who's making more money says, well, it's only if I make $30,000 more, it's only like, $20 some $100 more. And then after taxes, and I'm really happy. And what if I get a manager I don't like? They'll talk themselves out of it. So money doesn't even matter. So you don't have to offer them more. But if you don't, then your place of work is a commodity that people will interchange. And, right, remember, for every employee that leaves, the cost is typically from 100% anywhere to 300% of their salary to replace that person. So now it's a massive cost on your business to get someone leaving, right? Who, especially if you thought they were a good performer, they were at least there and not quitting, right? And you could have saved them, or you could have brought them into the culture and really got them to be a high performing individual. Like, there's significant costs and there's significant challenges coming. And then all the time that people are just wasting, right? Having to recruit similar people, and all the challenges of integrating every employee back into the organization itself, right? It's really difficult. And a lot of this has to be done remotely now, right? And remote onboarding is really difficult. It's much harder to do than in person. You have to have a whole science behind that and process that's going to work, and not that many organizations do. So, I mean, I think this is why managing, and end of the day, the key stat is it's up to the manager to keep the employee, right? It's not like a leadership, right? If you're a 30-person law firm, your managers are the ones that are keeping their employees. It's not you, because the managers are who they interact with every day and who they rely on. And so the strength of your management team is going to be the direction of your organization. And if you want to expand, right, and scale, it's not about your skills, the environment that you're creating overall for the people that you're working in. But that's, that is where, if you're a leader, you either have to figure out that you have to do this, or if you don't and are unaware or don't care or think it's not important, you are going to see some real challenges as you move forward, because that is just not where all the data suggests, where all the analysts are moving organizations as a whole, and everyone else and every employee's expectation of the workplace is based on what they see from other people and what they need. And if you're not meeting their needs, then they're going to find them somewhere else, or they'll treat you like a commodity and job hop and get what they want until they find a place that they really like. And if they don't, they'll just continue to do what they're doing and stay in a job for a certain period of time, or you'll get them there and you'll make them a partner, and all they're going to be is a hired gun. They don't care. Yeah. And that's going to hurt your law firm, because you have a bunch of disconnected people that don't like each other, that are there for one thing, which is, my year-end bonus so I can live in my big house, and I don't care about anyone here, but I'm doing it in a transactional nature, which at some point will signal the end of the law firm at some point, because enough people will argue, problems will occur, and you're headed for a disaster. And this happens all the time.
And it's happened for years. It's happened forever, but it is going to 10x right now. No joke. So our listeners, what I love about this conversation, the takeaway is for you to really power down and take an honest look at the structure within your law firm, and how much of your communication, your management, your weekly conversations that you're having with your team are all about production and numbers. If you don't have this human being, this human work, this teamwork, this collaboration, this team building, this deeply curious framework that Jason's sharing with us today, you best get on the fast track. And I am breathing a little bit of fear into this conversation. If anyone that's ever worked with me, they know I'm a straight shooter, and it's just inevitable now more than ever, especially in this virtual world. Employees don't have to put up with it anymore. They really don't. They can go work for, they are talking to people now more than ever, hopping on Zooms, in different chat rooms, in different Facebook rooms. And, now if they're not being treated well at this law firm, they could go work for a law firm across the country in a virtual setting. And trust me, the market is so tight in the legal space. So if nothing else, you really have to get this piece in place. You have to take the time and give the time to being able to work on the human side of things. So talk to us, Jason, in closing, about your Cards Against Mundanity. I love this.
I'd like to build on one thing that you just said, that what we're talking about is a data and research driven discussion.
Yeah.
So there's so much data and research that is out there to share on why this stuff matters for productivity, efficiency, profits, revenue, retention, client satisfaction. It's all around data-driven metrics that are driving their business. And this discussion is fully around that. It's not just some foo-foo thing. It's driven in how to be a highly competitive business and soar above the people that you're around with less workers and become more profitable and much more efficient, right? So I don't want to lose that, because sometimes people think about this and they're like, well, it's not really about the metrics. And I'm like, no, it's all about that.
Oh, thank you.
There's undeniable amount of data out there to support all of this stuff from a multitude of sources. So I think that that's where people should start to look at, that this discussion now is different than it was 20, 30 years ago when they were talking about it. But now there's tons and tons, and you can access it all on the internet, right? And you can Google it if you're like, well, I don't believe you, or like, I'm not sure it's there. Well, trust me, you can look and find out, and you will be really surprised at what it shows you and how much a difference the things we're talking about can mean on your end of the day revenue, on your revenue goals for 2021. So Cards Against Mundanity. So, I was talking about this before. It's based on Professor Arthur Aaron's exercise that he did, literally 23 years ago. And I started to use this in groups full of people because all my clients have teams of people like working in person, remote, work, internationally, all types of, different environments. And I thought to myself, like, the baseline problem is people aren't working as well together. There's lack of communication, there's conflicts, there's all of these things, and they're rooted in fundamental things such as trust, poor communication, right? And the challenges that come from all of that. And I was like, well, what could be a way that you could foster this between people to have meaningful experiences and conversations in a safe environment where people would do it with each other and learn a significant amount to be game changing in a short period of time that then would allow an organization to start to change their culture, the employee experience, and really change, the metrics that we've been talking about right here. And so I decided to try to do something out where I had essentially the game is that you ask a question and you have a group of people start to answer it, right? And the groups can be anywhere from, as small as 3 to like 10.
Great.
And you can have multiple groups simultaneously playing this, and they essentially act as though they were in the same group. So I've had groups of more than 1,000 people do this, and they treat each other as though they're still in the same group, right? And you could mix and match groups and slice and dice this and use this externally with clients and prospects and everything else. And it's just essentially asking vulnerable questions that are meaningful, that give you a lot of information about the person's history, experiences, what they care about, what they focus on, right? And the emotions behind it, so you can really get to know them as an individual and at a level that very few people in their life currently know them. And in many instances, no one knows them, right? And questions such as, so tell me about the most important lesson you've learned in the last year. If you had to thank one person for helping you become the person you are today, who would that be? And like, what did they do? Another question would be like, what's the biggest setback you've had in the last 5 years and how did you recover? What's your biggest blessing in disguise, right? And you could have fun things in there too. It's like, if you had one superpower, what would it be and why, right? And so, but when you start to think about it, when you start to get to know people at that level, and the thing about when you share it in a group is that you don't have to necessarily connect with every person, but if you connect with a few people in the group, that trust is embedded in the team itself. That's where the magic lies, right? Yes. And it's very easy because it's not as though you might say to someone, well, I don't like that experience isn't me, but you felt that person's loss or that joy that they're feeling and you connect with them on there. So it's connected on multi levels. So it's very easy to do. And, I've run this now over with like 50,000 people have done this and all like large companies, financial. So, I mean, everyone, super conservative environments, everywhere. And at the end of the day, it's always the same 1, 2, 3 mic drop, right? People end up like getting significantly higher trust and they learn all these new things they never knew. And
they start taking a bullet for you. Oh, you're in the weeds. Let me help you out. Let me, it's no longer, it eradicates in my experience, all the competition or the finger pointing and the blaming because they're collaborating from such a deeper level.
And then what you can do is you create a lot more trust in a very short period of time, right? I mean, you only have to play 6 or 10 questions and then ask people questions at the end. So how was this experience for you, right? What did you learn from it, right?
Yeah.
Like, how can you apply this in your work? How can you apply this with your colleagues, your manager maybe, or how could you apply this like in a setting with a client or a prospect? Like, where could you, and then you take it and make it actionable and everyone in the group hears it, right? And so there's a lot of opportunity at that point then to do additional things that are pretty small, but continue to build on this.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it doesn't take really that much time and it doesn't really take that much money to do it. But when you skip over these steps and you assume people are going to do them on their own, you're wrong. And these are the fundamental building blocks of all great teams. They just many times do it in different ways. And a lot of time it's chance. And a lot of times things will happen, right? You'll hear stories about people who've had health issues, right? Or health scares or near-death experiences, right? And then
Right.
teams galvanize around them. Well,
Yeah.
right? Well, why would you wait for something that's out of your hands? You can be proactive and do the same thing. And then you can think
Sure.
to yourself, like, what's the best team I've ever been on? Well, the
Mhm.
question to ask yourself, why isn't every team like that?
And your team can be like that. So, in closing, I really want to drive you all to Cards Against Mundanity. We'll have it in the show notes. We'll have Jason's website in there so you could look at all of his keynote speeches that he has done. It's just an amazing resource. So, listeners, right now, I want you all to make a commitment that you're going to pause and really take a deep dive and honest look at the way that you have been managing up to this time and make a commitment for a year-end sprint. Close 2020 stronger than ever in regards to how you are going to manage your team going into 2020, and just make an unwavering commitment that you are going to create the greatest culture and workplace based on trust, vulnerability, connection, and you're making it about the people first, and then the production and the KPIs will come. So, Jason, thank you so much for being our guest today. This is fantastic. We'll have all your connections and your links down there in the show notes. And we really would love to bring you back after we get some results from our listeners of adopting this game and really adopting the connection. I would love to create a study and look at this maybe mid 2020 and see how things have shifted and changed.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Look forward to it.
Great. Thank you for being our guest today.
Thanks.
Have a great day.